Breaking news! AMG releases Krennic previews in a thrilling two-parter. Are we blind? Deploy the reaction video.
Hello once again, everybody, to another rapid reaction. A bit more rapid this time. Things are coming fast and furious. Though I guess we're kind of done with previews probably until Adepticon. But anyways, I've got Lee here. Hello, Lee.
Hello. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this yet again. We're going to dive right in. But I will say up top, we're going to probably... There's going to be a little less analysis in this one, partly because I'm just tired of editing so much, and because we do have 4 units to get through. So we're just going to kind of start with just 2 things, one each, that really pop out to us about the units. So let's get started with, of course, the primary, Director Krennic. We'll just introduce him. He is a 9 cost primary in Empire, bringing 2 Force, and then we'll look at his unit card. And what do you want to bring up, Mr. Lee?
Yeah, I think for me, like the thing that stands out to me about Krennic that I think is noteworthy is the new and unique ability of just picking an objective and being like, that one's mine. I think there's so many situations where in Shatterpoint you get into like, man, the only solution I have for this is either a ton of swing where I'm moving so many bodies that I can get on this point because I just physically cannot wound enough people, or a force repulse, which is the only other way that I could clear this point. And Krennic gives a third solution in just like, all right, well, I have to go into the stance and I have to pick that place, but I could do it. And yeah, I think that opens some really interesting doors for an Empire player.
It's interesting because I think one of the best, like if you want to keep that point, it's probably best to do it on, it's going to be, I'm going to tie the point, and usually I wouldn't win it, but now I will, and now because it's tied, I'm going to keep it. But also Empire has a lot of tiebreaker bodies that can do that. And if you're outnumbered by more than 1, you're just going to lose it next turn, which, hey, maybe it'll be enough to like really, maybe it pulls the struggle cube to your side, who knows. Like it's definitely a very, very good ability. I think if Empire ever gets locked down, that becomes super crazy. I do think one of the big problems with it, not really a problem, but I think you do want to keep him in arrogance a lot because he does really chew through force as a character who only brings 2 of it. You know, if you've got him in arrogance, then you can use deploy the Garrison for free. You could start your turn in arrogance and then flip to high aspirations at the end. Yeah. But then, you know, his reactive ability, which is very good, especially in a revenge heavy meta, I think having something to like counter the revenge counter with your own swing on a wound, that becomes free if you can stay in arrogance. Your concerns are hardly warranted is not great for 2 force, but for 1 force, it's got its place. It's a nice to have. But I think that's the thing. There's definitely going to be some play there that really intrigues me about which stance you want to be in. And I think I've kind of already brought up my thing as far as arrogance and the force economy. And again, I think the problem, if we look here at arrogance, to just kind of go through his stances, the defense is not good. He doesn't get a block on 1 expertise, which is not great. So that's unfortunate. The icon density is not amazing for a primary, but you know, he's getting lots of icons. It's a fine stance. It's nothing to write home about, I would say.
Yeah, and like, I know that we are playing a fantasy game, but I'm personally perfectly fine seeing more characters who are not wearing armor and have not the best defense trees. It's like, yeah, no, I think it's actually very fitting for thematically the idea of being in an arrogant stance. It's an interesting approach.
Yeah. How about high aspirations? Anything there that's going to stand out to you?
I mean, I feel like a broken record a lot of the time, but I always love me a shove on 1. Very easy crits, which is always lovely to see. And, you know, like, I think there is a world where in a real pinch, if you need to get a free ability just because, like, you know, you're out of force or you are in high aspiration, so you don't have the force discount ability, you can get it active, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, he does have that in arrogance at spot number 3, so it might even be a little bit easier in arrogance. But I think in Arrogance, you don't really care about the free active as much if he's unwounded because you're already getting it for free. Yeah, similar as we always say, like shoves on 1 and 2, great. He also can get heals. It's a better attack tree, except for range 4 instead of range 5, and it's a much better defense.
I didn't notice that. That's actually
They're really leaning into this kind of different ranges for different stances, and I'm here for it. That's fine, and it's a better melee stance. So, like as far as attacking and being attacked, I think this is definitely the stance for Krennic.
Yeah.
So we are probably going to talk about him a little bit more when we think about how he interacts with all these units. So let's skip to the second article as we now look at some Death Troopers. The Macho Man himself strutting into the room. Oh, look at him, the Death Trooper Specialist. We had the Death Trooper Escort, now we've got a Specialist. It's going to be maybe tricky on the table telling all these Death Trooper models apart, so get used to it.
Yeah.
But what pops out, other than, yes, he's a 5 cost, what pops out to you about Death Trooper Specialist?
Just before we get to that,
Okay.
I do want to mention that, like, the art for the Death Trooper Specialist, I feel is so, like, he's clearly such a different, imposing presence. I love the new art direction we're seeing with some of these recent boxes, and I feel like the DTS, in particular, is a bit of a standout for where they're going with the art. So that's really cool to see.
This guy should have a stance called Arrogance. Like, look at that. Look at him. I just wish Cassian was cooler. His art looks so not cool compared to all these guys, but that's the rebel player in me talking.
As far as what stands out to me about the unit, kind of a curious take here. I actually really like the DTE compared to the DTS. It's interesting because I find myself in this middle ground of, like, I think he's meant to be this, like, sledgehammer of a unit, but I still prefer the DTE for, like, where you can get to on when he's got a focus and how many more dice he can throw out. I think their trees are fairly comparable, but being a 5 is rough.
Yeah, for
Especially
sure.
an Empire who doesn't have a ton of, like, high squad cost primaries.
I think in a Stormtrooper list, being a 5 is really rough unless you're with Krennic, because if you're forced to take Snowtroopers, that's not a place I want to be in. If you're with Krennic, then you can still take a 4-cost Storm, and okay. He is very force heavy, I think, is my takeaway. For a Krennic list, like he has some big swing. Let's look at his stance for a second. He basically has a Rex attack, so being able to do that twice, pretty dang good. Being able to expose someone on command, pretty dang good. Of course, that all costs force. So I think he seems like a fair 5 versus, Death Trooper Escort is probably too good of a 4. We think about the tier lists, the community tier list thing I did. Death Trooper Escort was solid number 2 in the game. Clear S tier, like sandwiched between Hask and Django. So like if you're in that like top tier, having the fact that it's maybe a debate in the right circumstances, I mean that is good. I wouldn't want this to be so good that it's clearly better than one of the best units in the game already.
100%. But, when you're paying the premium of the 5th point to get it in, it's like, you kind of hope for... Like, when we think about DTE being like, he can move himself, or he can move friends...
for free.
And, for free.
This guy can move a friend, but it costs force. Yeah.
And, the DTE is no slouch in combat. So, certainly, this is not a slight against the DTS. I think the DTS is a really interesting-looking secondary... that can do a bunch of things, but like you said, expensive to bring onto the board and expensive to run is a hard combination. But there's definitely a place, and I do it's always great seeing a secondary that can move someone and make 2 attacks.
I think it's good for the game that it's not a clear step up on DTE. 100%. I think it's tough for the unit as far as finding table time, because. A lot of the time you're going to say, I'm not going to pay that extra point. I'll get a better second or a better support because DTE is so good. But, maybe one day DTE gets nerfed a little bit.
I can see that happening.
And, way down the line probably. Or perhaps. How about normie Death Troopers?
Normie Death Troopers. There's nothing wrong with them. I think they've got a fairly competent kind of basic profile, so to say that something stands out is Maybe not the easiest thing to talk about, but I do love. I think we talked about this earlier when we were looking at kit, but I think support fire dash is actually like a really interesting thing to see in a faction. That said, Empire does have a ton of like movement chicanery that can happen, so just being able to attach this on the combat profile is nice.
Sort of. I sometimes it can be tough though. I think I love maybe that's strong. I like supporting fire here much more than I do on kit because you have a second body,
Yes.
right? It's a good ability on a support versus if this is kind of the main support ability a primary has, I'm kind of like, oh, that's not good enough for a primary, but on two body support, like this helps. And I think just as you've kind of alluded to, it works well in Empire. You think about Krennic. He has a gun, he prefers to probably be shooting, but all he can do on his own turn is advance. Okay, well now he can advance, hopefully get range, shoot, get a guaranteed dash. Veers, same thing. Advance, shoot, get a dash. I think that's much more useful than something like Republic where it's like, oh, it's all my Jedi, and they weren't able to get into melee, so now I can't attack anyways, and I can't get that dash. Or I'm already in melee and I don't really need that dash. So I think it just fits so much cleaner here. The combat tree, the call out here is what Dylan from Time to Nerd said in our local Discord. Finally, a stormtrooper tagged unit that can shove earlier than 3. So like,
Amazing.
yeah, these guys can shove, which is very handy.
I do like their expertise tree, like very consistent. Which again, like for support, perfectly fine, perfectly legit.
If you're paying for that dash and focus, or you get focus any other ways, it's going to be 7 at range or 7 in melee because of impact.
Yeah.
With that expertise, that's a great attack for a support at 4 cost. Absolutely. Now, speaking of stormtroopers who struggle to shove, that's a good way to transition over to the shore troopers. Another 4 coster. And of course, all these death troopers, shore troopers, they all have the stormtrooper tag. Just in case people weren't paying attention, just to be clear, they've all got the stormtrooper tag. What do you think? What's your standout on shore troopers?
I know it's like kind of a sleepy thing for them. Like I think people will look at this as like, oh wow, I get to roll 6 dice. My big standout is steadfast protection.
Is that sleepy? I think you're underestimating.
So good.
You're underestimating people, Lee. Come on. I feel like everyone's just going to say steadfast protection, which I don't disagree. That is my thing as well.
Yeah, steadfast protection on 8 health is very solid for a 4 cost unit. Yeah, I say sleepy because it's not exciting. People love like I get to roll more dice, or like I'll get extra momentum when I kill stuff, or like the things that win you a game. But like the reason why I think steadfast protection are like the sleepy winners is because like that wins you games too.
Yeah, you know what really wins you a game? When your opponent can't flip an objective because your steadfast came in clutch and you hold on to an objective and get tempo on them. Yeah, it's big. It is only while they're contesting, which doesn't matter too much for steadfast. Like, people probably aren't attacking me when I'm not contesting, and if they're shoving me, it's like not a huge deal. Important to remember that if in the attack, if you get shoved away from the objective, by the time the damage comes, you will not have protection. So that kind of chips into the 8 health. But, hey, clones would kill for for something like that, so you can't really complain. Yeah, so my thing, again, steadfast protection. Yeah, that's why you take these guys. Their combat card is nothing to write home about, really, but they shove on 3, which isn't ideal, but they're much more likely to get to 3 than stormtroopers. Stormtroopers aren't really getting results. They're more about getting conditions and some heals. So maybe there's still a world sometimes while you take stormtroopers. But I look at shores and I think, yeah, these guys just replace. Anytime you would have taken storms, just take shores. They're straight up better.
Yeah, I can definitely see that argument. For sure.
If you want defense, you take shores. And if you want movement tricks and stuff, you take death troopers. And if you really want to lean into it, you take both. If you're not too fussed about, not having dark troopers. So let's dive into some lists here where we're maybe taking both. What did you cook up for us today?
I do feel like it's a fairly obvious pairing, but
that's fine.
It's okay to be obvious from time to time. What I've got as our first go is Krennic DCS and the Shore Troopers for his box. And then Veers with the Stormtrooper Sergeant and Stormtroopers. But the idea generally with this that pairing, regardless if it's Stormtroopers or if it is Death Troopers, is a lot of Stormtroopers on the board, trying to make as much use out of the Stormtrooper Sergeant reactive to just essentially throw more dice down range. And I think Veers solves for a lot of the movement chicanery. Not that, like, Death Trooper Specialist can move people, and Stormtrooper Sergeant can move people as well.
I think there's something to Krennic Veers, but I think you're an absolute madman not to have Death Troopers. I think the whole way it works is because Death Troopers exist and can give extra movement to those primaries.
That is true.
So if you are looking to just kind of have classic Storms in there, I think you gotta drop Shore Troopers, because otherwise your primaries just don't have enough movement. I do like it otherwise, because it's two guys who are really leaning into that. This is going all in on the Stormtrooper keyword, and I can appreciate that.
Yeah. I do worry that one of the linchpins of this list is the Sergeant, because like so much of it is like, oh yeah, I'll get to throw extra dice downrange. It's like, that is still a reactive, and if the Sergeant gets wounded, like, it starts to get expensive. And a list that doesn't have a ton of force.
You've got a lot of competition in that kind of attack trigger. Yeah. That's a thing to think about with the Death Trooper Specialist, if we think of that, because Unrelenting Assault, the double attack, also triggers off an attack action as part of a combat action, but it's the attack that's the trigger, meaning if you, on that first attack, if you're adding dice with the Sergeant or you're taking the dash from the Death Troopers, you're not getting that second attack. So that's a strike against him. It's like, yes, I can attack twice, but I lose out on some other things if I'm going for that. But maybe that means it's just something you do sometimes rather than all the time. I was maybe going similar ways, where very similar to your list, except just putting Vader in instead of Veers. They're both 7s. That gives you a little bit more force to really play with Krennic's boss. Well, you are playing with Krennic's boss, because Vader is hanging out here. But you really play with his box. Of course, I'm not crazy, so I'd also put Death Troopers in that one. But I will say that's like list 1B. List 2, I'm actually going to go with a different Vader, because I think maybe Death Trooper Specialist, because of its force requirements, maybe it doesn't actually go best with Krennic. So let's make use of Krennic's cost of 9, put a different 5, put Vader 3 with him, some Shores, and then, just Gideon, Death Trooper, Escort. You can kind of put whatever you want. You can put Death Troopers here, just that's what I'll say, just because it uses Krennic's box, but Dark Troopers are just super good.
Yeah, so I was going to say, like, I think if you're willing to trade down on Stormtrooper synergy with Vader 3, which I think is... I do think this is a really funny world where it's like, oh yeah, you could get Vader, one of the most pivotal characters in the series, as a secondary for 5 points, or you could get this guy.
This guy. Better than unnamed Stormtrooper, who's just, that model pose is just like chilling. He's just like, whatevs. I'm a 3 cost, what do you expect?
Yeah. But yeah, I think if you're willing to trade out on Stormtrooper synergy, Vader's a great 5, a great secondary to put in for 5, and then obviously take Dark Troopers. A million times. I think Dark Troopers.
The problem with Darks is it leaves you with just, one Stormtrooper support for Deploy the Garrison. But Shores are also the best target for Deploy the Garrison because, if you dash them and give them the hunker, if they don't lose it, now they're rolling 6 dice with their out of activation attack. And that's a pretty good attack out of activation with their expertise getting 2-on-1. So hopefully they can stay alive, and you're kind of, if someone does knock them away, you're putting them back on the objective with steadfast protection. You got a lot of weird objective play with Krennic just auto-taking a point and then Vader contesting at range 3.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Moff Gideon breaking ties as well. That's always good.
I think sometimes people kind of get tunnel vision with this idea of like, oh, there's a rule where I get to use this tag, so I must use this tag. And like, I think, sometimes redundancy is good, but you only need one case of it. So one unit of Stormtroopers supports are fine.
I go back and forth on stuff like that, because then sometimes too it's like, oh well, now Krennic doesn't do much because his abilities are so limited with who they can target. There's a certain good stuff in flexibility, being like, okay, I have 4 bodies that I can move one of them instead of one of two bodies. But no, I
Absolutely.
hear what you're saying. As we said in the Rogue One thing, as we said in Cassian's thing, I'm going to be playing a lot of Rogue One Rebels. So if there's some Rogue One Empire out there, we'll make for some fun thematic matchups. So I look forward to that. Lee, thanks for joining again.
Always.
Have a good one, everybody.
Bye, all.